Hello, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Melissa Walker, and I'm going to be discussing the sociological issues in young adult literature by reviewing Beth Younger's book, Learning Curve, Body Image, and Female Sexuality in Young Adult Literature. So to give you an overview, I'm going to be discussing body image, pregnancy and sexuality, homosexuality, romance and repression, and young adult series fiction. So we'll start off with body image. Body image becomes an issue in young adult literature because characters are being presented as always being pressured to conform to society's vision of physical attractiveness. One of the quotes in her book says, "Authors rarely describe male bodies, but female bodies are continually looked at in what becomes a powerful representation of the male gaze." Now, as we know, the male gaze has to do with what society thinks men think women should look like, and this essentially objectifies the women. Now, while this is typically seen as an issue in film, it is trickling over to literature, and this is essentially teaching young readers that this is how the world works. So if they're not considered societally attractive, their self-worth decreases. She also plays with the issue of size in relation to body image. She says that characters are presented in two ways in these novels. Thin women are presented as responsible, in control, and sexually monogamous, while larger women are presented as passive, irresponsible, and sexually available. So this causes two problems. First, it presents a competition between women based specifically on body image and size, and it also sets up stereotypes based on a woman's outer appearance. So she also discusses pregnancy and sexuality. Pregnancy becomes an issue in young adult literature because it takes away the protagonist's autonomy. The friends, family, teachers, other active participants in the protagonist's life all try to take over the protagonist once they've discovered that she is pregnant. However, while trying to control the woman, they are also ostracizing her. Friends abandon her, family puts her in a corner because she's pregnant. Now, these novels present three options for the teenage mother. The first is to have the baby, which typically involves giving up school. The second option is to give the baby up for adoption, which is often seen as the most noble choice in these novels. And the third is to have an abortion, which up until recently was seen as an evil action for the teenage mother to take. Now, these novels also often present a male stereotype relating to the idea of the deadbeat dad. So these soon-to-be teenage fathers are typically portrayed as either telling the mother to give up the child or leaving without any sort of notice. So this is teaching readers to assume that teenage fathers are unreliable. So she also examines the idea of homosexuality, specifically lesbianism, in novels. While this isn't so much of an issue, she discusses it as more of a positive attribute of young adult literature. She says that there are positive effects of lesbianism in young adult novels because these novels offer acceptance and understanding to readers who are possibly confused with their own sexual orientation. Many of these also break the homosexual rule, which, as we know, has to do with how society feels as though gays and lesbians should act. This breaks those stereotypes by creating individual characters. It also creates a safe space for readers who are then given the opportunity to imagine themselves maybe as a character or taking on characters' attributes to become more comfortable with who they are. Younger also discusses this idea of the importance of female-centered stories. She claims that in a patriarchal world, we do not have many of these. However, when these stories are specifically female-focused, it offers new perspectives and original ideas for readers to take in. The next area that she discusses is romance and repression. Now, romance can be seen as a negative aspect in a book, especially when that romance leads to abuse. However, she discusses it in a slightly different light, having to do with the protagonist, the female protagonist, detaching herself from her traditional family structure in order to gain some form of her own independence. So this breaking of tradition, or breaking the patriarchal structure as is most often found, gives the character the ability to re-identify herself without the influence of her family. Many of these novels are deemed feminist novels, which envision women's worth unattached to a man. So this becomes important to these characters and to the readers, because it shows that women do not need to identify themselves with a man in order to be successful. The final area that she tackles is series fiction. This is the most problematic. As you can see, some of the examples I pulled are from Gossip Girl, The Clique, The A-List. I read many of these in middle school and high school, so I can definitely see where she's coming from. These books do have an obsession with appearance. Many of the conflicts in these novels deal with a girl looking a certain way, deal with jealousy, deal with competition because of physical attributes. We can relate this directly to the beauty myth, which is society's way to say this is how women should look and act, and if you do so, men will be attracted to you. That is what these novels focus on. There's also this concept of attractiveness in these novels, which becomes problematic because it's seen as though every character in the novel is considered attractive unless otherwise deemed so. So these characters who are considered unattractive are ostracized and pulled out of the crowd to be made fun of, as many of the conflicts focus on. Now, this is a major issue of disempowerment, especially for readers, because it's teaching young readers, especially young female readers, that to be successful they need to focus on their physical appearance and try to conform with what society wants. Otherwise, like the unattractive characters, they will be abandoned and ignored. So I took these issues and applied them to some of the novels that I have read recently. The selection is a series. To give you a brief rundown, it has to do with a futuristic world where the prince is required to get married, so to do so they pull women from different rankings in society and have them compete against each other in what is essentially like a Miss America contest. So this is definitely a major issue in body image, because each female character in the novel, is pitted against the other in this beauty contest where nothing really matters except their physical appearance. The romance is a problem because the male lead is weeding out these women to pick his bride based on his sexual chemistry with them and not having anything to do with an emotional attachment. Repression also becomes an issue because the women are forced to compete against each other, therefore repressing who they are in themselves, instead bringing out their worst attributes to try to impress the prince by degrading other women. Now, on the opposite end of that, there is a novel called North of Beautiful. It has to do with a 17-year-old girl who has a port wine stain on her face. She's not comfortable with her body or with who she is. However, she meets a young man who, after they fall in love, or while they fall in love, he teaches her to accept herself. So, as I said, in regards to body image, she has a port wine stain on her face, which makes her very uncomfortable with her body. However, she learns to accept this and learns the body image is not everything. After she falls in love with the male lead who helps her protect herself, who helps her accept herself through his emotional attachment to her and the emotional support that he offers. Repression is an issue in the fact that the protagonist initially represses herself because of the deformity on her face. However, after gaining the support of the male lead, she is able to learn to accept herself. So you can see how these issues can either be presented as negatively or positively, depending on how the author writes the book. Okay, so now that you have learned a little bit about some of the sociological issues in young adult literature, I do have some questions for you. I'll post these in the discussion board as well. So have you seen examples of these sociological issues in recent books or novels that you've read? Now these do not have to be specifically young adult novels, they can be anything you've read for class. Which of these issues do you find to be the most problematic for young readers? And in the case of these issues, what would progress look like? Thank you for your time.